Hi, everyone. My name is Joey, and it's so good to be here with you today. For those who we haven't had the privilege of meeting, I serve here at ICC with the college ministry, and there's going to be a picture of my family coming up in a moment. Uh, yeah, that's my wife and our two kids, Caleb and Waturi, and we have the amazing privilege of raising them up in these strange times that we live in as a country. So I don't know if you guys have an idea how privileged you are to have Pastor Steve as your pastor here. Like, you need to, really, you need to just acknowledge how much he has a big heart, how he loves people, how much he just loves Jesus, yes, and wants others to know and to follow him. And it's been an amazing friendship that we've had over the last couple of years, just getting to know each other and to work with each other. But today, I was invited to come and share around the moment that we are all living in and the experience that we are all going through at this time. And I want to start with a story that happened when I was a child. So when I was growing up, we used to grow up, I grew up in Eastlands, and we grew up in this neighborhood where you'd watch a movie at home, and afterwards, the following day, you'd come and you guys would talk about it, you'd reenact it, and you'd do all kinds of things to just relive the moments that you had watched in that movie. And so I think we'd just watched a really good action movie the night before. My dad had come with, you know how the packaging he'd come with a new radio. And you know the packaging, the styrofoam, that white thing that you find in things, yes? Just nod if, yeah, we know it, huh? So I made a gun out of that styrofoam, and the following day we went outside to play. So I had my gun, and there was this friend of mine, his name was Capco, strange name, but as we are playing, you know, you're getting excited, you're reenacting the moments from the movie. So I'm shooting him, but he's not dying. He keeps coming closer. I'm shooting him a bit more. He's not dying. And then he came and he broke my gun. Guys, there was a split second there, and I don't know what happened. Because when he broke my gun, you know, how many of you have watched Inside Out? Not the second one, the first one. You know how Riley, when she's being given broccoli, and then Anga is just seated and like reading the newspaper, and then she's told, you know what, you need to have your broccoli. If you don't do it, no dessert. And then Anga just takes over, and then like she starts throwing a tantrum. I felt like that in that moment, and I punched him in the face. Broke 2 teeth. I'm not a violent person, I promise. Broke 2 teeth. And then, so he started crying. I'm just like, you broke my gun. Who does that? He started crying, like, I'm just like, bro, move on. Just like, I went back home. My dad was one of those dads who you don't mess with. So he said, nitakusema kwa babako. My dad came home in the evening, and I was waiting to see what he would do, because I had, in that moment, done what was, like, in our house, nobody fought. The only people who you saw express anger was our parents. The rest of us, you were not allowed to show your anger. And I kept waiting for what he was going to do. Hold that thought. Today we're going to talk about anger and injustice. You see, if there's a feeling that has come up in a lot of people's hearts and in a lot of people's lives the last couple of weeks, Among the myriad of feelings, I think if you're like me, you've experienced some joy and celebration somewhere, and you've experienced some grief and heartbreak. But there's been more and more, we've been seeing a lot of anger, not just bubbling, but sort of erupting from the lives of people. Maybe in your own life you've felt it, or you've needed to express it, maybe online or offline. But all of us have felt that sort of feeling of something not getting what you want, or something being taken from you that you need to have. And the question is, what do we do with our anger when we experience injustice? What do we do with our anger when things are not the way they should be? When we look around our world and we see brokenness and we see things that don't make sense, when we look around our own lives and you feel like, you know what? This is not how things should be. And you begin to feel that sense that you should take matters into your own hands, or you should do something about it. When you feel it rising up in your body. And you know, for many of us, we were never taught how to process anger. For many of us, nobody helped us. We didn't see good models of people navigating their own anger, and we don't know what to do with our anger, apart from express it. There's no other filter that we have for navigating our anger. And more we are living in a culture that is being called, someone said that we are living in the age of anger. That there is something inside our lives and inside the culture that we're living in, politically, economically, socially, culturally, like even domestically, in our own homes, more and more anger is becoming the most visible, dominant emotion. You look around and you see people, husbands beating wives. I think a few months ago there was a dad who banned their son because he stole 200 bob. And you're just like, what? Why would you do that? Globally, we're living in a world that is filled with outrage and rage. And the question we have to ask ourselves, next slide. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, what do we do and how do we live in a culture and in an age of rage? You see, there's a healthy kind of anger. The kind of anger that comes up in our lives when we see things that are broken and we want to do something. We want the way made right. But as you look at the world that we live in, it seems like we've gone past that point and we've entered a place where our anger has been used to become the fuel, not just for fixing things, not just for mending lives, not just for mending areas that are broken, but now anger is becoming the thing that causes us to step into violence. It causes us to use language against people that demeans them, that takes away their dignity. It's the thing that is being used now more often to become and to define the reality for people. And when we live in a world such as that, what do we do as Christians? Is it right for us to get angry in such a world? I think God would say yes. We should get angry when things are broken and when our lives are falling apart. We should get angry when we see people being oppressed, when we see our own lives not reflecting His goodness and not being able to model what He wants us to see. We should get angry. But we should also filter that anger through a lens that God gives us. You see, among the first questions in the scriptures is a question that was asked to Cain when he was with his brother, and as they were going to offer sacrifices, we're told that Abel, depending on where you went to school, offered a better sacrifice. And we're told that Cain was downcast, and God comes to him, and God asks Cain, Cain, why are you so angry? And I wonder if someone asked you that question today, how you'd respond. Why are you so angry? What is that sense that is in your heart bearing a burden, and what are you doing about it? And I want us to look at the life of Jesus. And when Jesus was giving his manifesto for what it looks like to be his follower and to live in his kingdom, Jesus decided that twice in that manifesto, he was going to talk about anger. 2 times, Jesus in Matthew chapter 5 talks to us and helps us to see the filter which we should process our anger. Because you see, when anger is not processed, it turns into something else. When anger is not processed, it becomes toxic and unhealthy. It becomes like a cancer that begins to eat not just into our lives, but it eats into everything else that is in it. So let's read Matthew chapter 5, beginning verse 38 to 48. It says, I think I had it somewhere. Okay. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give them your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse from anyone who borrows from you. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And honestly, as a Christ follower, that is one of the most puzzling passages I have ever read. I have wrestled with that passage time and time again, because I'm just like, Jesus, do you live in the real world? Have you ever been bullied? Have you ever gone through injustice? Have you ever suffered? Has someone ever done something to you and you completely felt like you needed to respond and react? I've been like, you know what? I don't think Jesus lived in the real world. He probably lived in some fantasy world where, you know what, everyone was nice. And you know what? It was just a small minority of people who were bullied. And then they would go like, oh, umemuumiza. Just stand the other cheek, everything will be fine. And then we move on. Had Jesus ever experienced systematic injustice? Had he ever seen what it was like for people to be hurt over and over and over again, such that their entire lives get defined by oppression? And if we asked Jesus that question, he would respond and say, yes, I lived in that world. And the things that I am saying to you are not things that I am just pulling from the air, but they are realities that we need to live into. You see, Jesus introduces us to a radical approach to seeing anger and injustice. Jesus introduces us to a very radical approach. And I want us to see this because in the context of what we just read, you'll begin to see parallels for our own lives and for the places that we have been. During the time of Jesus, Israel had been occupied by the Romans, and when the Romans moved in and they occupied a place, what they did is they turned that place into a Roman colony. And essentially, they would begin to do some things that the people there would suffer. And they began to do things that would cause them to suffer and to experience a lot of oppression. You see, the Romans were known for taxing people. And they would go and they would collect taxes from every Roman colony in the name of Caesar, and it would help them to build the empire that was Rome. And more than collecting taxes, they would get people within those colonies and they would make them tax collectors. And they would impose heavy taxes on those people. And the people who were picked out to be tax collectors were corrupt officials. People who would not just take the Roman tax, instead they would take the Roman tax plus my tax, right? And they started becoming notorious even amongst the community that they were in. One of them famously known as? Drawing parallels, yes? Huh? And the Romans were not just known for how they would tax people. Remember, Rome existed before there was a system of policing. Think about it for a moment. There were no police. So who was there? The military. Rome only knew one way to enforce the law. If you are a military official, you could do what was right in your own eyes, and that was considered law. And so Roman officials would roam around Israel and Galilee and the places that Jesus had lived. And what would they do? You see, a Roman official would see an Israelite and they would consider the Israelites inferior to them. The Israelites were not like citizens of Rome who had an identity. And so they would go around Rome and they would go around Israel and they would see someone doing something that they don't approve of, and they would do what? They would slap them. And they wouldn't even give them a proper slap. Notice what the text tells us. The text tells us that if someone slaps you on the right cheek, George, come, just come. I promise. I watched Power Slap last week. I just want to try something. No, just come. So, this is what the Romans would do. You see, for you to slap someone, George is standing across from me. For me to slap him on the right cheek, I can't use my right hand. Right? This is his left cheek. So for me to slap him, I would have to use my left hand. But surely I need to give him a good slap. So I can't use my left hand. So what the Romans would do, because the Israelites were considered lower, inferior, they would not even give you a proper slap with your hand. They would give you a backhand slap. Just stand there. Like, this is how I see it. You need to put your hands behind your back so that, like, that's how, like, yeah, that's that thing. I watched it. I just put your hands, like, so they'd give you like a backhand slap because you are not even worthy to be given a proper slap. Imagine how demeaning, how humiliating that was. Imagine what that would do to your dignity. Imagine how you would feel. And the moment someone gives you a backhand slap, and just stand. You need to. The moment someone gives you like a slap like that, Jesus says, do what? George, you may sit. You see, the Romans had such an inferior view of people that in their oppression, they thought, you know what, you don't deserve the dignity of being insulted. And so they do that. And there were some rich landowners, and the rich landowners would go around if there was something called debt court. And they would, if you owed them money, they would take you and they would take you to court. And in debt court, what you could get is the judge would judge immediately what you were supposed to do. And they would say, you know what, you can't pay back your debt, give this person your coat. And if you know anything about Bible stories, coats were such valuable things. They would be passed from generation to generation. Like if your father put a coat on you, it would be considered a prized possession. People didn't own a lot of coats. You know, like the way now we have wardrobes, you can pick Ntavaia beige leo. Ladies, Amaya brown. Like they didn't have many coats. You probably had one or two coats. And those coats were family heirlooms. So imagine someone coming and saying, give me that coat. Like people would feel insulted. They would feel like, you know what? And Jesus says, when someone asks for your coat, imagine how angry you would get for someone asking for the most prized wearable that you had. Today it would be like someone asking for your phone. And like, if someone asks for your coat, Jesus says, take off your shirt as well and give it to them. And then the Romans would go even further. And they would say, you know what? If someone asks you to walk a mile, and they were military, so they carried these heavy bags. And they would put them on the Israelites, and they would say, you know what? Take this bag, I want you to walk with it. And they would carry these heavy miles and this heavy luggage. And if someone asks you, the maximum they were allowed to ask a person to carry it was 1 mile. And Jesus says, if someone asks you to walk 1 mile, walk not 1 mile, but walk 2 miles. Now, imagine the people who are hearing that in their original context, being oppressed, feeling the injustice of Rome. Imagine how angry they would have been. Imagine how upset. Imagine how much rage that had been building up over years of experiencing that. Imagine how they felt. And Jesus says, you know what, that moment that you're angry, it appears you have 2 options. The first one is that Roman slaps you, and what do? Slap him back. React. Do something. Fight for your rights. Stand up for yourself. Be a man. Be a woman. The other option you have is taking the humiliation. Be a coward. And do what? Retreat. Go home. Let that anger sit inside of you. Plan maybe your revenge next time. Next time. Hautanipiga hivyo next time. Right? It appears that you'd probably have just 2 options. Either release that anger in that moment in a reactive way, or do what? Retreat and let that anger sit in. But Jesus, knowing who we are, knowing who he wants us to be, introduces a third way. Jesus says there's something that you can do with that anger apart from reacting or retreating. This is what I want you to do. And he says, I want you to break the cycle. I want you to break the cycle. I don't want you to sit with that anger. I don't want you to take that anger and unleash it on someone. I want you to break the cycle of anger that got us here. You see, the story of history is written in anger. From the time of Cain, the story of history has been written in anger. And this is what anger does. This is the cycle of anger. Someone makes you angry. Your ego gets violated. You feel like, you know what? Umse, ameni hurt, ameni offend. Hii relationship ilikuwa iwak. Another ni mimi ni nani? Who breaks up with me? You look at systematic, and what happens? You look at an oppressor or someone who's doing injustice. You know what? You feel your ego has been violated. And then you become the victim. You become the victim. It's now us versus them. It's those people who hurt us, those people who make life difficult for us. That person who doesn't care, that person who humiliated me. And the moment you become the victim, everyone else is a perpetrator. And when people are perpetrators, what do we do with them? We fight them. We begin to name them, label them. We begin to treat them with contempt. And then that anger leaks out of us in our words. It leaks out of us in the ways that we respond. It leaks out of us in the ways that we engage with people. And then it breaks out into violence. And so the history of our world becomes a history of oppressor, beating. People fighting. And then you become exactly what you wish the other person was not. You become the next oppressor. And then people are oppressed. And then you fight them, you beat them. And then they fight back. And then they rise up and they become exactly the next cycle of oppression. And Jesus says there's a different way. We can break that cycle, and it starts with you. It starts with you. And so when God spoke to Cain and asked him, Cain, why are you so angry? You see, some of us here might think that we are not angry people. You might think that, you know what, anger ni ya wale watu wenye wako huko. But in reality, all of us carry some form of anger. We've just gotten really good at hiding the symptoms. For some of us, we numb it. We numb it and nobody can see it, but deep down inside, you know exactly how angry you are. For some of us, it comes out as sarcasm. You know, you think you're really funny. But in reality, you just have a lot of contempt. You've just learned how to manage it. Yeah? It comes out in our memes. Comes out in the ways that we interact with people. For some of us, it comes out in the way that we process the ways that we have been hurt and the ways that we respond to the people who hurt us. We cut them off. We cancel them. We have no room in our hearts, and our hearts have become heavy and cold. And what Jesus invites us to do is that he invites us to deal with our hearts so that we can become the kind of people who don't respond to injustice and oppression with the same heart that carries that injustice. Instead, we can respond to it with a different type of heart. You see, in Nazi Germany, in the 1940s, there was one of the people who was taken to the concentration camps was a doctor and a psychologist. His name was Viktor Frankl. And when Viktor Frankl was taken to the concentration camps, what happened was he started to study how people would respond the moment they were put in situations where they were suffering and where they were out of control. And as people were brought to those concentration camps, he noticed that different people reacted differently. And some people felt completely hopeless and helpless, and they were unable to cope with the circumstances there. And as they were led to the places where people were being burnt and where people were in their dying moments, some people would panic, they would scream, and other people would react differently. Some people went with a lot of stoic postures, and other people, you know what, some people would break down, they would start crying, calling for their mummies, and he noticed there was a small group of people who were handling death and the suffering very differently from everyone else. He found that people who had faith were doing something different. People who carried an identity outside of themselves were doing something different. And when he came out of prison, when he came out of the concentration camps, he survived. He was a Holocaust survivor. And when he came out, he spent the next 4 weeks writing a book that has become a global bestseller since he wrote it, Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he wrote this quote, that between stimulus and response, there's a space. There's a space. And in that space lies our power to choose. And in those choices that we make lies the meaning of our lives. You see, Jesus understood that even before it was written. And so Jesus says, when someone hits you, when you feel that anger, you have a choice. There's a space. I want you to put something in that space. And what I want you to put in that space is I want you to put compassion and dignity and courage in that space. George, please come. So imagine if someone hits you with a backhand slap, and you know what, your face, you turn, and you're almost falling to the side, and your entire body posture is something, it looks crouched. For you to stand up, for you to give them your right cheek, left, what would you have to do? You'd have to stand up straight. You'd have to have a dignity and a humanity for you to give them your left cheek. It wouldn't be something that you do naturally. It would be something that you have to choose to do. You can say it. It would be something that you have to choose. Jesus doesn't undermine the difficulty of our anger and the humiliation. Instead, he invites us to take that space where we respond with something more. And so when Paul writes to the Ephesians, he tells them this in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. He tells them, this is the Message translation, go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry because it means you can respond to what's going on. But he says, do not use your anger as fuel for revenge. and do not stay angry. Do not go to bed angry, and do not give the devil that kind of foothold in your life. You see, we are told that it's okay to be angry, especially when we are angry about the right things. But here's the thing. That anger needs to be filtered in certain ways. We're told, number one, do not use your anger as fuel for revenge. Acknowledge that you are upset, that there's something wrong and broken. But you see, anger must be processed. And if you're a follower of Christ here, Christ gives us, the scriptures give us tools to process our anger. For centuries, Christians have been using the Psalms as a way for them to process the anger that they have been feeling, to process the injustice, the oppression that has been there. Christians have used prayer as a way to respond to some of the ways that they have felt undermined. Have you ever read the Psalms? They sound like someone who's like bipolar, right? He starts, smite my enemies, make them fall in a pit. Lord, I trust you. I bless you. Like, you're just like, are you okay? But the Psalms are tools for us to process our anger. They allow us to move in healthy ways. Some of the tools that we have require us to slow down. We need to lament. We need to say, you know what, Lord, I don't know, when was the last time you cried? You see, if you've never been so angry that you needed to cry, there's something wrong. You've allowed your body to shut down. Because God has given us tears as a way for us to deal with anger. So allow the anger to be processed. Number 2, Paul says, do not use your anger as fuel. Number 2, do not stay angry. You see, for Paul, he knew that our anger is okay if we feel it and we process it. The moment we sit with it and we take it in, something happens. Anger is like a seed. And it begins to grow roots in our lives, and it begins to take over the space that we are in. When we are angry, anger never stays isolated. It's always mobile. You get angry, you stay with it, you start taking it out on others. Guys are like, hey, bro, what happened? Like, we were just cool. Anger begins to move into places that it was not in. And so what do we need to do for us not to stay angry? I think for some of us, we need to start cutting the bait. We spend so much time online. We get so angry. And for some of us, just disconnecting is going to help us to begin to deal with our anger. You see, social media is not bad, but the designers of X and TikTok and Facebook need to be paid. So, what happens? The algorithms are designed to do what? To amplify outrage. There was a whistleblower from Facebook who in 2019 came out and he showed how Facebook built the algorithm. And if you put an angry face emoji, it was given a 5 on the point score. And if you put a smiley, it was given a 1. So the scoring system was from 1 to 5. So 5 posts get more amplification, 1 posts back in a year. And it was revealed to the world what people had already been seeing. That all of a sudden, if you put a post that has rage, that has a feeling of polarization, if you say something divisive, what happens? Your post gets amplified. And so, for some of us, we just need to cut the bait. Allow yourself some space between you and the news, you and what's happening online, so that you can process and deal with your anger. Number 3, deal with your wounds. Some of us are just walking bleeding. We have wounds from people who've hurt us, and we're angry and we haven't dealt with it. And because of that, we become hurt people who go around hurting other people. For some of us, the invitation today is just to sit back and begin to ask yourself, where have I been wounded, and where do I need to start dealing with those wounds? And then lastly, we're invited to be vigilant. Paul says, do not give the devil that kind of foothold in your life. You see, anger can become like a gateway drug. I don't know. We all know gateway drugs that operate, that introduce people to much hardcore kind of stuff. So anger, when we sit with it, when we stay with it, what happens is it becomes a doorway. And anytime you get angry, the devil holds that door open, and he becomes like a watchman. And it's just like addiction. Troop us. What else? He says, you know what? All that violence, pit and Danny, all that pain, he stands there and he just holds that door open. But you see, the good news about how we can deal with our anger is found with someone else who held the door open. You see, when Jesus was on the cross, he held his arms wide open. Peter, when they were in the garden and the soldiers come for him, Peter pulls out his sword and is like swinging to cut off the ear of the soldier. And what does Jesus do? He tells him, put away the sword. I did not come for us to deal with anger by meting out anger. I came to hold the door open so that we could get new hearts for us to live a different way. And so I want us to pray. If we could bow our heads. And I don't know for you what burden you're carrying today regarding anger, where you've been hurt, the wounds and the pain that's there. I want to pray for two kinds of people today. The first one is, if you're carrying a really heavy burden of anger, and you've just never allowed God to become the one who holds the door open for you so that you have a new heart, I'd like to pray for you. If you're in this room today, God's forgiveness extends to you and to every place where you have been injured. If you allow him, God can give you a new heart, and he can begin to do a work of transformation inside you. So if that's you, would you raise your hand? You're saying, God, I need a new heart. I need a new heart. Thank you for those hands. Thank you for those hands. Let's pray. Father, in Jesus' name, you see your sons and daughters. I pray that this day